I believe one of the fundamental differences between the progressive and conservatives in our churches, a difference that cannot really be reconciled in any way, comes down to, I would say, those who profess as important or as prime the doctrine of the fall of man, and those who don't profess it as prime. Those who profess the doctrine of the fall of man are those who believe that we are not born as perfect representatives of the Imago Dei, the divine image of God. We are made in God's image, but every facet of us is marked by sin because of the fall of Adam. Therefore, because of our fallen nature, death and rebirth, a salvation, you might say, is required for a right relationship with God, which does come through the death, resurrection, and life of Jesus Christ, a life that is lived out through the power of the Holy Spirit in communion with the church and through Christ himself in receiving of the sacraments that we will do later on in the service. That is a conservative, that is a traditionalist, and John Wesley view of humanity. And if you don't believe me that this view is foundational to our Methodist heritage, just read almost any of John Wesley's sermons, especially the one entitled On the Education of Children. He says, quote this, "Every man is by his fallen nature a lover of the creature instead of creator, a lover of pleasure in every kind more than a love of God. Human freedom has become captive to the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, or the pride of life. These are the prevailing diseases of our fallen human nature." Wesleyan theology on the fall. The other end of the spectrum on how we view the fall is where I would say progressives are. They view the fall, or their view of the fall is sort of like this. Yes, people have some flaws, but generally we are made in God's image, and we don't need to die and be reborn, or at least we don't need to focus on that rebirth, and don't need to focus on all of the hatred of sin that is there, the indwelling sin of each individual, the dying to self and all that stuff, because it's not important and it can be seen as judgmental, and it's generally not helpful or healthy. And what churches need to offer is the innate goodness of creation and the innate goodness that is in each individual. And we need to bring out the good by blessing the good in people and the love that they show towards each other, because God is love. And anything we do that seems loving must be of God. Therefore, anything that seems like anything that seems like love is good. And so the job of the church becomes the affirming of anything that seems like a loving good. And then that in some way will point you to God, because to focus on our fallenness or being born into sin and means that we have to hate our sin and therefore in some way hate ourselves. And that's just not very helpful in this day and age. And so I would say that is a progressive view of the fall of man, that it's not helpful or loving, and they kind of stand against all the negative talk. And those are the two ways to view the fall. And as you can tell, they are unrecognizable and unreconcilable, I would say, to each other. We've tried for many, many years to reconcile this in the church. But I believe unless we have that traditional understanding and belief in the fall of man into sin, that total depravity of us all, unless we begin with that assumption, then there really is no need for scriptural moral standard, because we can just pick and choose which truth we feel are good and which ones are the ones that we would say is the moral standard. It becomes subjective. And then if everything's subjective, then there's really no need for Jesus, because we'll always pick the good that's in us as reasons for our salvation and not Christ's goodness. Unless we understand our absolute captivity, as John Wesley would say, unless we understand our absolute captivity to sin, there's really no reason for the rest of it that we do in the church. It is the cornerstone that everything else is kind of built upon.